42 seconds. That's how long it takes for an Adélie penguin to betray her mate for a rock. She waits until he's settled beside their single egg, slips off the nest, and waddles 300 feet across a crowded colony to a stranger's territory, stepping over sleeping neighbors and around fresh fights still in progress. A minute later, she's walking back with a stone in her beak that isn't hers to take, past her own mate, who never once looks up from the egg he's guarding. What just happened has nothing to do with love. It has everything to do with real estate. Most people assume penguins are the animal kingdom's great romantics, birds that pick one partner and stay loyal for life, marching through blizzards to prove it. That reputation, built largely on documentaries about a completely different species, is about to take a hit. Today we're going to find out why a species famous for lifelong devotion actually runs one of the coldest, most calculated economies in nature, and why the currency isn't fish or territory or size. It's stones. Plain, ordinary stones, small enough to fit in a beak, and an entire breeding season, an entire species' reproductive future built on who has enough of them and who's willing to take them from somebody else. At Cape Adélie, on the northern tip of Antarctica, roughly 250,000 breeding pairs of Adélie penguins crowd onto a few square miles of exposed rock, the largest colony of this species on the continent. The noise alone is constant, a wall of overlapping braying calls that never fully stops for months, and the smell of guano carries for miles downwind before a ship ever reaches shore. Every October, as the sea ice begins to break apart, the males arrive first. They've spent the winter alone at sea, and now they have exactly one job before the females show up: claim a patch of bare ground and start piling stones on it. Not a den, not a burrow, a mound, built one pebble at a time, and everything that follows depends on how tall it gets. The reason is brutally simple. Antarctic summer means meltwater, and meltwater means flooding. An egg resting directly on wet ground chills and dies within hours, the parent unable to do anything but watch the ground turn to slush beneath it. A nest raised even 2 or 3 inches on a pile of stones survives the same storm untouched, water running off and away instead of pooling. So a male's entire reproductive future is decided by a number: how many stones he can gather before a female walks past and makes her choice. That's where the first complication begins. There are never enough stones to go around. Cape Adélie is mostly hard rock and permanent ice. Loose, fist-sized pebbles are scattered thin across the colony, concentrated in only a handful of accessible patches, and tens of thousands of males are racing for the same limited supply at the same time. Fights break out constantly along the boundary lines, flippers slapping, beaks locking onto necks, birds knocked flat in a scramble over a single stone, sometimes over a stone barely larger than a coin. But digging for new pebbles at the colony's edge is slow, and slow is a luxury nobody has when a female could walk past on any given afternoon. So the more efficient strategy is theft. A male waits until his neighbor waddles off toward open water to feed, then calmly crosses the gap and lifts stones straight out of the unguarded nest, one at a time, tucking each into his own pile before the owner returns. Researchers monitoring individual nests at Cape Bird have watched entire mounds vanish and reappear 3 territories away over the course of a single afternoon, one stone at a time. The original owner none the wiser until he comes home to a flattened patch of dirt. Some individuals turn out to be repeat offenders. One male tracked across an entire nesting season was recorded raiding neighboring nests dozens of separate times, building the tallest, best-drained mound in his section of the colony almost entirely out of other birds' labor. while the males on either side of him rebuilt from scratch again and again, and never once caught him in the act. When the females finally arrive, weeks of frantic construction get tested in a matter of seconds. A female doesn't inspect a male's size or his plumage. She inspects his real estate. Bigger pile, better odds. Males perform what researchers call an ecstatic display to advertise their work, throwing the head straight back, braying a call loud enough to carry across the entire roaring colony, flippers beating the air in a rhythm that says unmistakably, "Come see what I've built." A female who likes what she sees will settle in beside him and, often within the hour, add a stone of her own to the pile, a kind of down payment on the arrangement. But if the mate she paired with last season hasn't returned within a couple of days of her own arrival, she doesn't wait around out of loyalty. She moves on to whichever male nearby has the tallest, driest mound, and the abandoned original nest simply gets absorbed into a rival's territory within days. Adélie penguins are famous for returning to the exact same 6-inch patch of ground, breeding season after breeding season, sometimes for a decade or more. They are considerably less famous for returning to the exact same partner. It's the ground that gets the loyalty. The bird standing on it is negotiable. And that distinction is about to matter a great deal, because once a pair bond is settled, the stone problem doesn't disappear. It escalates. Incubation duty splits the pair into shifts, one bird holding the egg for up to 2 weeks at a stretch, while the other heads out to sea to feed, fasting the entire time it's on nest duty, and sometimes losing close to half its body weight before it's finally relieved. Meanwhile, the nest still needs more material, even after the egg is laid, because a taller, denser pile drains faster the next time the ice melts overhead. So while one partner slowly starves at sea, the other sits pinned to a single egg, unable to leave, watching a rival a few feet away quietly build a taller wall. Weather adds its own separate complication on top of all this. Katabatic winds roaring down off the polar plateau can hit well over 80 miles an hour with almost no warning, and a sudden storm partway through the season can bury an entire nest under drifting snow in a matter of hours. A pile of 200 stones survives that kind of burial and keeps draining once the melt comes. A thin, half-finished mound doesn't, and the egg underneath it chills before either parent can dig it free. Every stone a male failed to gather in October becomes a debt that a spring blizzard collects with interest. This is where 2 researchers, Fiona Hunter and Lloyd Spencer Davis, found something in the 1990s that upended the tidy textbook picture of penguin monogamy completely. Working the colony at Cape Bird, they documented females slipping off their own nest, egg left unguarded for less than a minute, to visit an unpaired male several nests over. The female solicits copulation directly, often approaching several different bachelor males across a single season before settling on one nearby. The bachelor obliges without hesitation, and before heading home, she takes a single stone from his pile and carries it back to her own nest. Hunter and Davis ran genetic paternity tests on the eggs that followed. In the overwhelming majority of cases, the chick still belonged to her original partner. The extra pair male gained nothing from the exchange except the act itself, and he lost a stone in the bargain. In their published observations, roughly a third of females at the colony were seen engaging in this exact pattern of behavior in a single season. From the female's side, this wasn't infidelity in any human sense. It was a transaction wearing the costume of one, and the male on the receiving end had no idea he'd been the one paying for it. Which raises an obvious question. Why would any male allow this to keep happening? Some don't. Bachelor males have been observed chasing a visiting female off before she can leave with anything at all, snapping and shoving until she retreats empty-beaked, having risked the trip for nothing. And sometimes, the timing goes catastrophically wrong. Her return trip crosses paths with her actual mate, arriving back from the sea to find the nest unattended and his partner nowhere in sight. What follows isn't a quiet reunion. It's a colony-wide eruption of noise. Flippers cracking against feathers, both birds tumbling off the very pile they spent weeks building together. Neighboring pairs shrieking their own alarm calls at the disturbance until the whole section of the colony sounds like it's under attack. Actual injuries are rare, but the display of aggression is not. A male whose mate has wandered will often rebuild his ecstatic call even louder afterward, braying until his voice cracks, as if volume alone could repair what just happened, while the female simply resettles onto the nest as though nothing occurred at all. And stones are not even the only danger circling these nests. South polar skuas, gull-like predators that nest along the fringes of every Adélie colony, watch specifically for this kind of chaos, circling low over sections of the colony where fights and disputes are already underway. A fight, a distracted parent, a nest left open for even 30 seconds, and a skua drops straight in and takes the egg whole, swallowing it before either penguin can react, then lifting off again before the returning mate even reaches the nest. Long-term studies at Antarctic colonies have recorded skuas responsible for a substantial share of all egg loss in a given season, and the birds appear to specifically target moments of disruption rather than hunting at random. That means every stone theft, every extra pair visit, every shoving match over a wandering mate carries a second silent cost, measured in eggs that never make it to hatching, a tax collected by a predator that has learned exactly when penguins are distracted enough to rob. Fasting itself carries its own separate risk, one that has nothing to do with stones or rivals at all. A bird that heads out to sea to feed depends on finding krill and fish in reasonable range of the colony. And in years when the ice edge retreats unusually far, that return trip can stretch well past the 2 weeks its starving partner can comfortably wait, forcing a hungry bird to choose between an even longer fast and abandoning the egg outright. Nests have been documented failing simply because one bird never made it back in time, the partner on egg duty eventually abandoning a chilling egg rather than starve to death defending it. There is no fight in this version of the story, no rival to blame, just an empty patch of ocean where a mate should have been, and a stone pile that ends up meaning nothing at all. By the time a chick does hatch, the stakes only shift, they don't ease. For roughly 3 weeks, the chick needs constant guarding against both cold and skuas, until it's finally old enough to join a creche, a tight, huddled group of chicks from dozens of different nests clustered together for warmth and safety, while both parents are finally free to forage at the same time. Predation pressure on creches is intense enough that researchers have documented skuas working in pairs, one bird distracting the guarding adults, while the other snatches a chick from the edge of the huddle. Chicks positioned at the center of a creche fare noticeably better than the ones pushed toward the outer edge by sheer crowding, which means even survival at this late stage still comes down to position, the same currency of ground that decided everything back in October. The birds that make it through this stage owe their survival, ultimately, to a mound of stones their father piled up months earlier during a fistfight nobody filmed. None of this was obvious to the first scientists who ever laid eyes on it. In the austral summer of 1911, a zoologist named George Murray Levick spent months camped at Cape Adare as part of Robert Falcon Scott's Terra Nova expedition, stationed directly beside the very colony this story is built around. Levick watched Adélie penguins more closely and for longer than any scientist before him, recording courtship, nest theft, and mating behavior in obsessive daily detail. He later published a mainstream account of the expedition's findings in 1914, a tidy, family-friendly book that left out most of what troubled him. But some of what he witnessed unsettled him badly enough that he refused to describe it in plain English in his working notebook. He switched to classical Greek mid-sentence, apparently assuming no casual reader back home could follow it. Recording behavior he judged too indecent for a British scientific audience of the time. A separate manuscript on the subject, titled plainly after the behavior it documented, was printed in only about 100 copies in 1915 for private circulation among a handful of scientists and never entered general circulation at all. It sat sealed in the Natural History Museum's archive in London for almost a century until the museum's curator of birds, Douglas Russell, tracked down the surviving copies, translated the Greek passages back into English, and published the complete account openly in 2012 alongside co-authors William Sladen and David Ainley, two of the researchers who had continued studying this same colony decades later. What Levick saw at Cape Adare wasn't exaggeration or scandal. It was ordinary penguin behavior roughly a century ahead of the scientific language his own era was willing to use to describe it plainly. That brings us back to the myth this whole story started with. Nature documentaries love to frame Adelie penguins and their relatives as monogamous, loyal, almost sentimental animals. Birds who reunite each year purely out of devotion. That framing isn't entirely false, but it isn't what's actually happening either. What keeps a pair together season after season isn't affection. It's a shared patch of ground that already has stones piled on it, and neither bird particularly wants to start over from zero somewhere else in the colony. The comparison with emperor penguins, a species popularly lumped in with the same romantic reputation, makes the mechanism clearer. Emperors breed on shifting sea ice with no fixed nest site to return to at all. So a pair bond there really does depend almost entirely on the two birds finding each other again among tens of thousands of near-identical adults. Adelies have the opposite problem solved for them. The ground itself doesn't move, and whoever already owns the best-stocked mound on it has the leverage. Loyalty here is a landlord's calculation, not a romantic one, and the birds that break from a partner aren't failing at monogamy. They're simply following the incentive that was there the whole time. By the end of the breeding season, the colony empties out in stages, the roar of braying calls fading week by week as birds disperse back to open water. Chicks that survived the skuas and the storms molt into juvenile feathers and head out toward open water entirely on their own, with no parent to guide the way. Adults that lost their egg early in the season sometimes attempt to breed again the following year with a completely different partner, having learned, in the coldest and most literal sense, that the stones matter more than the bird who happened to be sitting on them. Right now, researchers track colonies like Cape Adare using satellite imagery, counting the reddish-brown guano stains each colony leaves on the rock to estimate populations from orbit, and watching for the same warning sign every season. Sea ice, breaking up later or earlier than usual, shifts the entire stone and timing calculation this story depends on. Arriving females finding fewer bare patches of ground exposed and fewer windows to build before the melt. Somewhere under next October's snow, the exact same fight over the exact same pile of rocks is already waiting to happen again, right on schedule. Because in a place with almost nothing to build with, a single stone can end up worth more than a mate.